Thebes, 656 BC. The sun isn't a blessing here. It is a hammer. It strikes the limestone pillars of Karnak with a violence that bleeds the color from the world, leaving only blinding white and shadows black enough to hide a scream. We are standing at the gates of the most complex religious machine ever constructed by human hands. But look closer, past the pylons that scrape the sky, past the avenue of ram-headed sphinx that stare with dead stone eyes. In the deepest recess of the sanctuary, the air is thick with the smell of Kyphian scents, a cloying, sweet scent designed to mask the odor of something else. Fear. A young woman stands in the dark. She is trembling, not from cold, but from the realization of what she has just become. She is royal. She is beautiful. And she has just been erased. What happened in this room, under the supervision of the high priests of Amun, was not a simple ritual. It was an amputation of the soul. The history books will tell you she was honored. They will call her the god's wife of Amun. They will speak of her power, her wealth, her influence. But the records buried in the dust of Medinet Habu tell a different story. A story of a woman fed to a system that needed her body for legitimacy and her silence for survival. What happened next was one of history's most buried secrets. This isn't pure myth. It comes from the adoption stele of the 26th dynasty, from the whispers of Herodotus, and from the cold, hard logic of bureaucratic texts found in the temple archives. It wasn't magic. It was politics disguised as divinity. Hit like if you've ever wondered how the ancient world controlled its most powerful women. Because this wasn't just about religion. It was about the machine. When we think of ancient Egypt, we think of golden sands and flowing Nile waters. We need to stop that. We need to visualize Egypt as it truly was, a rigid, industrial bureaucracy. The Temple of Amun at Karnak was not a church. It was a corporation, a state within a state. It owned land, it owned cattle, it owned mines, and it owned people. To maintain this colossal engine of economic dominance, the priesthood needed a figurehead who was absolute in purity but powerless in reality. They needed a vessel. The sacred virgin wasn't a chosen one. She was a manufactured component. The priests didn't see a woman. They saw a seal of approval for their tax exemptions. The air in Thebes didn't smell of mysticism. It smelled of iron, ink, and strategy. To understand the horror, you have to understand the scale. This wasn't a village cult. This was an empire-wide protocol. The priesthood had engineered a theology that required the god's wife to be the physical hand of the deity on earth. But here's the catch. To be the wife of a god meant you could never be the wife of a man. You could never bear children. Your lineage, your biology, your future, it all ended the moment you crossed the threshold. It was a death sentence without the mercy of the grave. The machine required a sacrifice, but blood was too messy. Instead, they took time. They took potential. They took the very concept of self. This was industrialized consecration. The priests were the engineers, and the woman was the fuel. It wasn't cruelty for cruelty's sake. It was policy. It was the infrastructure of control. Let's zoom in. The micro. Her name is Nitocris. It is the year 656 BC. She is the daughter of Pharaoh Samtigai, a man who unified Egypt not with love, but with steel and mercenaries. Nitocris is not a priestess by choice. She is a political hostage. Her father needs to control the south, where the Theban priesthood holds all the gold. He cannot invade Thebes without starting a civil war. So, he sends a gift. He sends his daughter. Imagine the journey. Sailing south from the delta, leaving behind the green marshes of her childhood for the arid, imposing cliffs of the south. She is surrounded by servants who are actually guards. She is dressed in linen that costs more than a village, but it binds her like a shroud. She has dreams, perhaps of a husband, perhaps of children, perhaps just of a quiet life watching the ibis fly over the reeds. All of that is burning on the pyre of her father's ambition. She knows what is coming. She knows she's being delivered to the house of Amun. To the world, it is an elevation. To her, it is an abduction. The intermediary in this transaction is not a soldier, but a priest. A man named Montumhad. History calls him the fourth prophet of Amun, the mayor of Thebes. He is the architect of her prison. He's the one who drafted the paperwork. We have his statues today, stern, unsmiling, realistic. He looks like a man who checks ledgers, not a man who prays. He knew that for the machine to work, Nitocris had to be broken before she even arrived. The letters sent ahead didn't discuss her comfort. They discussed her dowry and the estates she would manage. It was a property transfer. Nitocris was the asset. The priesthood needed her royal blood to legitimize their hoarding of wealth, and in exchange, they would grant her the title of divine adoratrix. It sounds beautiful, but in the lexicon of the priests, divine meant untouchable, and adoratrix meant servant. She was walking into a trap that had been set centuries before she was born. This wasn't chaos. It was a merger. The preparations for her arrival were terrifying in their precision. The city of Thebes was scrubbed. The route was lined with silent crowds. But for Nitocris, the preparation was personal. Before she could enter the temple, she had to be purified. This is a word historians love to use. Purification. It sounds clean. It sounds holy. But in the context of the machine, purification is the systematic removal of humanity. It is the stripping away of the individual to make room for the office. They weren't washing away dirt. They were washing away Nitocris. They were preparing a blank canvas upon which the priests would paint their own desires. The water was cold. The hands that scrubbed her were indifferent. It was the first step in a targeted dehumanization process that would last for the rest of her life. The day of the adoption. This is the moment the machine claims its prize. The text of the adoption stela of Nitocris still exists. It reads like a legal contract, not a hymn. I have given to him my daughter to be a god's wife. The transaction is complete. Nitocris stands before the great gates. The noise is deafening, sistra shaking, drums beating, the chanting of thousands. But notice the rhythm. It is hypnotic, repetitive, designed to induce a trance state. This is sensory overload as a control tactic. The priests surround her. They are shaved, oiled, smelling of animal fat and stale incense. They chant formulas in a language that is already archaic, words that vibrate in the chest. She is dressed in the regalia of the goddess Mut. The wig is heavy, pulling her head back, forcing her chin up. She cannot look down. She cannot look away. She must stare into the darkness of the sanctuary. Then, the silence. The public spectacle ends and the private horror begins. She's led into the inner sanctum, the Holy of Holies. Only the high priest and the king may enter here, and now her. The heavy cedar doors slam shut. The roar of the crowd is cut off instantly. She is alone with the statue of Amun and the priests. This is where the worse-than-death element truly begins. It wasn't physical torture in the way we think of racks and whips. It was the torture of identity. She was forced to renounce her biological family. She had to perform the ritual of the hand. Ancient texts allude to this. The god's wife stimulating the creative force of the god. While scholars debate the literalness, the symbolic weight is crushing. She is reduced to a sexual functionary for a statue, a living prop in a theater of stone. She is told that if she fails, the sun will not rise. The Nile will not flood. The burden of the cosmos is placed on the shoulders of a teenager. The tagging. Just as cattle were branded, the god's wife was marked. Not with iron, but with names. Her birth name, Nitocris, became secondary. She was now Shepenwepet. She was the hand of the god. The priests controlled her schedule down to the minute. Awake at dawn. Ritual ablutions, presentation of mat, the recitation of lists. There was no free time. There was no leisure. Every breath she took was mandated by the protocol. This wasn't a life. It was a performance that never ended. The machine didn't just want her obedience. It wanted her exhaustion. A tired mind doesn't rebel. A tired mind accepts the reality presented to it. And the reality was this: you are no longer human. You are a piece of the temple infrastructure, just like the columns, just like the altar. Let's talk about the residence. The harem of Amun. Victorian historians imagined this as a place of luxury and scandal. They were wrong. It was a nunnery run by accountants. Nitocris lived in a palace of mud brick and gold, surrounded by women who were all part of the hierarchy. Spies. Every servant was a reporter for the high priest. If she wept, it was noted. If she refused food, it was recorded. The macro view shows us the brilliance of this system. By isolating the pharaoh's daughter, the priest cut the king off from his own bloodline in the south. She was a hostage in a gilded cage. She had wealth-vast estates, thousands of servants, but she couldn't spend a copper ring without the seal of the high steward. It was the illusion of power. She could command the construction of a chapel, but she couldn't command a boat to take her home. The psychological toll of enforced celibacy in a culture obsessed with fertility cannot be overstated. In Egypt, to die without children was to risk total oblivion. There would be no one to maintain your cult, no one to speak your name. By forcing the god's wife to remain a virgin, the priests were threatening her with spiritual annihilation. It was a gun held to her eternal soul. Serve us, and we will remember you. Defy us, and you vanish. This was the lever of control. It wasn't just about sex. It was about legacy. The machine promised her immortality in stone in exchange for her mortality in flesh. She had to adopt a daughter, usually the daughter of the next pharaoh, continuing the cycle. She had to train her own replacement. Imagine the cruelty of raising a child, knowing you were training her to endure the same prison you were in, knowing you were the jailer. But the machine is not perfect. There are cracks. We see them in the subtle defiance of the art. In her chapel at Medinet Habu, Nitocris is depicted making offerings. But look at the eyes. The artisans, perhaps sympathetic, perhaps just observant, carved a heaviness there, a sorrow, and there are gaps in the records. Days where the rituals were delayed. Moments where the bureaucracy stumbled. Was this illness, or was it refusal? Did she ever just stop? Did she ever stand before the great statue of Amun and refuse to lift the sistrum? We can imagine the panic of the priests. The machine relies on all gears turning. If the god's wife refuses, the theology breaks. These moments of silence were likely met with intense pressure. Not violence. You don't bruise the fruit you intend to sell, but psychological siege. The people will starve, Nitocris. The floods will fail, Nitocris. It will be your fault. Years turn into decades. The girl becomes a woman. The woman becomes an elder. The beauty fades, replaced by the hard mask of authority. Nitocris ruled, if you can call it that, for over 60 years. She saw pharaohs rise and fall. She saw the Assyrians invade. She saw the city of Thebes sacked and burned. And through it all, she remained in the temple. The machine is durable. Even when the city burned, the rituals continued. The priests prioritized the safety of the idol over the safety of the people. Nitocris was moved from bunker to bunker, a precious artifact to be hidden. This is the descent. The realization that she matters less than the gold she wears. During the sack of Thebes, the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal took everything. But he didn't take her. Why? Because she was part of the infrastructure. She was useful to the conquerors too. The machine adapts. New masters, same protocol. It wasn't improvised cruelty. It was infrastructure. As she aged, the isolation deepened. Her biological family was dead. Her adopted daughter, Anknes Nereber, was waiting in the wings, young, impatient. Perhaps looking at Nitocris with the same disdain Nitocris once felt for her predecessor. The cycle is vicious. The victim becomes the enforcer. We have records of Nitocris managing the estates, signing off on land grants. Her signature is steady, controlled. It is the hand of a woman who is surrendered to the logic of the ledger. The human twist is that she survived. She didn't go mad. She didn't kill herself. She became the machine. She merged with it. Is that a victory? Or is that the ultimate defeat? To let the system consume you so completely that there is nothing left of the girl who sailed from Sais. There is a moment recorded in a fragmentary text where she makes an offering to her mother, Shepenupet. A moment of tenderness in a world of stone. She built a chapel for her. She ensured her burial was magnificent. In a system designed to erase connection, she forged a bond with the only other person who understood the horror, the woman who imprisoned her. It's a variation of Stockholm Syndrome, played out on a dynastic scale. They were sisters in captivity. The sacred virgins formed a sorority of shadows. They protected each other from the worst excesses of the priesthood. Perhaps that was her rebellion. Not to break the system, but to find love within it, despite the mandate of solitude. A small, quiet flicker of humanity in the dark. But let's look at the breaking point, the twist. History is written by the victors, but archaeology speaks for the victims. In her tomb, the layout is ... unusual. It connects directly to the temple. Even in death, she couldn't leave. But there is an inscription, a prayer, not the standard formula. A plea to Osiris for a cool breeze. It's a standard phrase, yes, but in the context of her life suffocating, hot, enclosed, it reads like a desperate cry for freedom. The intermediary, the priest Montumhat, died before her. His tomb is massive, a palace for the dead. Hers is modest. The contrast is the final insult. The employee outshines the queen. But here's the twist. Her name survived. His dynasty collapsed. The priesthood that controlled her was eventually crushed by the Persians. The machine broke. But the memory of the god's wife remained. There is a story, perhaps apocryphal, perhaps true, that when the Persians came, the god's wife walked out to meet them. Unarmed, unafraid. Why would she fear an invading army? She had lived with the high priests of Amun for 60 years. She had stared into the face of a god that demanded her soul. A man with a spear was nothing. This wasn't bravery born of courage. It was bravery born of numbness. The machine had hardened her into diamond. She negotiated the surrender of the city. She saved Thebes. The useless ritual vessel, the token woman, was the only one with the authority to stand before the conqueror. The irony is staggering. The tool became the savior. The priests hid. The virgin stood tall. This defies the narrative of the helpless victim. Yes, she was abused by the system. Yes, she was robbed of a life. But she forged a new one. It was a cold, hard life, but it was hers. This challenges our definition of power. We think of power as freedom, but sometimes power is endurance. Sometimes power is just refusing to die when the world wants you to. Nitocris didn't break the wheel. She didn't smash the machine. She simply outlasted it. She died in 585 BC. They buried her in the temple complex of Medinet Habu. They put her in the ground, sealed the stone, and walked away. The machine stopped humming for a moment, then restarted with the next girl, Agnes Nereber. The cycle reset. But the scratches on the wall remained. How did the Empire react to her death? Did they mourn? No, they audited. The records show an immediate inventory of her estates. The transition of power was seamless. The machine does not grieve. It replaces. The priesthood passed laws to ensure the wealth stayed within the temple, tightening the noose for the next god's wife. They learned from Nitocris. They realized she had become too powerful, too iconic, so they restricted the next one even further. This is the nature of bureaucratic evil. It learns. It optimizes. It saw the humanity Nitocris displayed as a bug in the software, and it patched it. The subsequent divine adoratrices were even more shadowy, even more erased. The silence grew louder, but the people remembered. While the state sanitized the event, the local folklore kept her alive. We find votive offerings left at her chapel centuries later. Common people, the ones crushed by the same machine that crushed her, saw a kinship. They didn't see a remote demigod. They saw a fellow prisoner. This is the system reaction failing. You can control the laws, you can control the money, but you cannot control the story. The official history said she was the hand of the god. The unofficial history whispered that she was the weeping mother of Thebes. The contrast between the official dogma and the public memory is where the truth hides. Eventually, the role itself was abolished. When the Persians took full control, they dismantled the office of the god's wife. Not out of mercy, but because it was a rival center of power, the machine was finally turned off. The sacred virgins were released or killed. We don't know for sure. The records end abruptly. It's a chilling silence. One day, the rituals were performed. The next, dust. The infrastructure of the sacred virgin was abandoned, left to rot in the desert sun. The worse-than-death fate was replaced by the simple, brutal violence of conquest. And perhaps, for the women trapped inside, the end of the institution was the only mercy they ever received. Jump to the modern day. Archaeologists excavating the chapels of the divine adoratrices at Medinet Habu found them remarkably intact. Why? Because they were built within the fortified walls of the temple. Even in death, they are inside the prison. When they opened the sarcophagi, they found the bones of women who lived long lives. No signs of trauma on the bones. The violence wasn't physical. It was existential. But look closer at the grave goods. They are rich, yes, but impersonal, standardized. There are no personal trinkets, no toys from childhood, no love letters, just the equipment of their office. It confirms the theory. They were not buried as people. They were buried as decommissioned machinery. This brings us to the philosophy. Civilization versus barbarism. We like to think of ancient Egypt as the height of civilization. Pyramids, mathematics, medicine. But civilization is often built on the backs of the voiceless. The sacred virgin was a casualty of order. The priests believed that by crushing one woman's life, they were saving the universe from chaos. It's the ultimate utilitarian calculation. Is it worth destroying one person to maintain the stability of the state? The priest said yes. The machine said yes. But standing in that cold tomb, looking at the empty mask of a woman who never knew freedom, the answer feels different. It feels like a crime. Nitocris, Sheppenwebed, Agnes Naraber, say their names. Not the titles, the names. They were the fuel for an empire that is now dust. The priests are gone. The gods are silent. But the story remains. It reminds us that the most terrifying prisons aren't made of iron bars. They are made of duty, expectation, and the crushing weight of being chosen. What happened to them was worse than death because it stole their life while they were still using it. If this story unsettled you, if it made you look at the golden mask of the pharaohs differently, then hit subscribe. Uncomfortable truths matter. History isn't just dates and battles. It's the sound of a door locking and the silence that follows.